we're starting to get into noting point of view and perspective. And our goals here are to be able to distinguish our perspective from that of a narrator and author, but also perspectives of characters. First thing we need to note is that point of view, which is how a story is told. We have what's called first-person point of view, which is exemplified in Sharon Draper's Out of My Mind. And you can tell that it's first-person point of view because the character is referring to herself. So she's the one telling the story. In this sample, I wear tiny gold earrings. Sometimes people never even ask my name, like it's not important or something. My name is Melody. Then we have third-person point of view. That's where the narrator or the writer is referring to the characters in the story, but they're not actually part of the story. This particular example here comes from The Land of Stories. Connor heard his sister's high-pitched scream before he realized what had happened. A large troll had jumped right in front of them on the bridge. He was short and very wide with an enormous head. He was covered in matted fur with large eyes and a snout. Notice how we're talking about Connor and his, so that's what we call third person. And just for reference, I have second person in here. We're really focusing on first and third, but in case you were wondering, sometimes a writer might use a third person point of view, a second person point of view, where they're writing as if they're putting you into the story. And so here you notice that it says, oops, that's background information. Here we go. You're one, or you here. So it's much less common. First person and third person is what we're looking to distinguish. Now, when it comes to perspective, that's where we're considering that viewpoint of a particular character. And a character's view can be influenced by their background or their experiences. And so when we do that, we really have to consider that character's attitude and many other things. I want to share this story because I think it does a great job of showing how perspectives can differ. And it's called Voices in the Park by Anthony Brown. It was time to take Victoria, our pedigree Labrador, and Charles, our son, for a walk. When we arrived at the park, I let Victoria off her leash. Immediately, some scruffy mongrel appeared and started bothering her. I shooed off, but the horrible thing chased her all over the park. I ordered it to go away, but it took no notice of me whatsoever. Sit, I said to Charles. Here. I was just planning what we should have to eat that evening when I saw Charles had disappeared. Oh dear, where had he gone? You get some frightful types in the park these days. I called his name for what seemed like ages. Then I saw him talking to a very rough-looking child. Charles, come here at once, I said. And come here, please, Victoria. We walked home in silence. Here's the second voice.
I needed to get out of the house, so me and Smudge took the dog to the park. He loves it there. I wish I had half the energy he's got. I settled on a bench and looked through the paper for a job. I know it's a waste of time, but you gotta have some hope, haven't you? Then it was time to go. Smudge cheered me up. She chattered happily to me all the way home.
Third voice. I was at home on my own again. It's so boring.
Then my mother said it was time for our walk. There was a very friendly dog in the park, and Victoria was having a great time. I wished I was.
Do you want to come on a slide? A voice asked.
It was a girl, unfortunately, but I went anyway. She was great on the slide. She went really fast. I was amazed. The two dogs raced around like old friends. The girl took off her coat and swung on the climbing bars, so I did the same. I'm good at climbing trees, so I showed her how to do it. She told me her name was Smudge. A funny name, I know, but she's nice. Then my mother caught us walking together, and I had to go home. Maybe Smudge will be there next time.
And the fourth voice. Dad had really been fed up, so I was happy when he said we could take Albert to the park. Albert's always in such a hurry to be left off his leash. He went straight up to this nice dog and sniffed its backside. He always does that. Of course, the other dog didn't mind, but its owner was really angry, this silly twit. I got to talking to this boy. I thought he was kind of a wimp at first, but he's okay. We played on the seesaw, and he didn't say much, but later on, he was more friendly. We both burst out laughing when we saw Albert taking a swim. Then we played on the bandstand, and I felt really, really happy. Charlie picked a flower and gave it to me. Then his mom called him, and we had to go. He looked sad. When I got home, I put the flower in some water and made Dad a nice cup of cocoa. So if you noticed in the story, there were 4 characters in the park at the same time. Each one was a different voice. The first was this mother with her son Charles and the dog Victoria. And you notice how she views things, pointing out frightful types of people. And she pointed out the mongrel that was playing with the dog Victoria. And I think it's interesting how she saw her son Charles, who happens to be playing with the character at the end, but she's calling her very rough looking. The next character was the father, and so Smudge then is his daughter and the name of the girl. And so from his perspective, notice how the park looks very different than it did from the first ladies. In the illustrations, things seem to be very bright, but for him, everything seems to be very dark. Again, notice that. Now he talks about how his daughter is happy all the way home. Then the next perspective is Charles. He's alone. Notice how he's viewing the park. Very different from his mother. You see in the illustrations, look at the difference. That could reflect how he feels and how he's viewing things, his perspective. This picture I find extremely interesting because we have Charles and then the girl who we learned is Smudge. Look at the difference in the setting on the both sides. Looks like things are starting to clear up too as the kids are playing together. See the difference? But then he has to go home. Look at the tree. Now when we get to that fourth voice, or it happens to be Smudge and then the dog Albert, look how she views the mother. And look at her interpretation of the park. It looks very different from many of the other characters. Look at that with his father. She's seeing things bright and colorful. Notice this. And then look at this. This is when she calls him Charlie, were talking together. And yet, when you go back to the perspective of the mother, look at the two. Same children in the same scene, but the perspective or the point of view is very, very different. And so in your notebook, you'll add the information about perspective, and then these are examples from the text that you can point out.